proof video, I'm going to be going over periphrastics, and I'm assisted by my Latin 2 class on this date, September 26, 2025. Nevertheless, let's begin. A periphrastic, as we all know, consists of two or more words, yet is a singular one verb. And so the first thing you'll be putting in your guided notes is the fact that it is two words, one verb, or one verbal expression. Nevertheless, one word will be and we are going to then pan over here. Participle is exactly right. And that participle is going to be obviously either this participle, the perfect passive participle, this participle, the future active participle, or this participle, the future passive participle. The present active participle in Latin is never used as a part of a periphrastic. Nevertheless, we continue on. The other form of the verb that you will use is a form of the verb sum esse, and so therefore you can put it in there, S-U-M, E-S-S-E. Now, sum esse plus a participle have made for us a periphrastic. Now, we have already learned, do not follow me, we have already learned that the perfect passive verb and the pluperfect passive verb and the future perfect passive verb are participles. Not participles, are periphrastics. But most people, most Latin teacher, most Latinists do not consider the perfect passive in that blank, or the pluperfect passive in that blank, or the future perfect passive in that blank indicatives to be periphrastics because they are just so common. The reason I call them periphrastics is that they are. And it is now time for our first item to be put in. And so, Pictor.
Your first item is periphrastic. P-E-R-I-S-P-H-R-A-S-T-I-C.
Periphrastic, very good. Make sure you spell it correctly again. P-E-R-I-P-H-R-A-S-T-I-C. And now we go to number two. Not yet. All right. Now, if we were to take our verb that is over here, agere, egi, actus, and I could obviously, let's go with third plural just for funs and giggles. It could be acti, or acti, or acta. You would have to use nominative. But I'm going to go with nominative masculine for all three. They are identical. So therefore, what distinguishes the perfect passive versus the pluperfect passive or the future perfect passive is the form of the verb to be that you paired with them. For the perfect passive, you are going to pair it with the present of the verb to be. So you pair the present of the verb to be with the perfect passive participle and you get perfect passive verb. And so therefore, sunt if we're going third plural. You pair with the perfect passive participle the imperfect of the verb to be to make a pluperfect passive verb, and so we would pair with the errant. Then you pair with the future, or I should say the perfect passive participle, the future of the verb to be, ero, eris, erit, erimis, eritis, erunt, in order to make a future perfect passive verb, and therefore it would be erunt. And we've seen this. They have been driven, they had been driven, they will have been driven. However, if you were to pick another Latin teacher, they would not consider these periphrastics because they are just so common. Instead, the term periphrastic is almost exclusively used for the future active periphrastic, which uses a future active participle, also called the first periphrastic, and the future passive periphrastic, also known as the second periphrastic, or also termed the gerundive of obligation. So to make sure that we know what to fill in, I will read it for you again. Instead, the term periphrastic is almost exclusively used for the future active periphrastic, so that's what you put in the blank, also called the first periphrastic, which uses the future active participle, and you have then the future passive periphrastic, also known as the second periphrastic, or termed the gerundive of obligation. So do we have the correct blanks there? I will read it again. Instead of the term periphrastic is almost exclusively used for the future active periphrastic, also called the first periphrastic, which uses the future active participle, and then you have the future passive periphrastic, also known as the second periphrastic, or also termed the gerundive of obligation. Now, boys and girls, let's take a look at the two types of periphrastics that would be called. So I again will use my verb ago, agere, egiatus, and here have acturus, and over here, for the second one, I will have agendus. I could have had actura, I could have had agenda, I could have had acturum, I could have had agendum, I could make it plural, in which it would be actori, I, or agendi, I, Just for sake of example, I'm using this. Now, boys and girls, when we are dealing with the future active periphrastic, we rejoice, because the future active periphrastic is idiot-proof. That's what you put in the quotations. It is idiot-proof. Idiot-proof. In that you translate each constituent, let me write that word for you, constituent part exactly as it appears. Now, let me explain what that means. All right. What that means is that you cannot think you see sunt, because if you do think you see sunt, the word are comes out your mouth. Instead, it should be translated they were driven or they have been driven. You cannot think you see errant, because if you think you do, the word were comes out your mouth, when instead it should be had been driven, because you see the whole. You cannot think you see erunt, because if you think you see erunt, the words will come out of your mouth, and instead it should be will have been. It is at this time that we have our second word that indeed you will be putting in for that free and easy 100.
Your second word is idiot. I-D-I-O-T.
Because the future active periphrastic is idiot-proof is exactly right. Thank you, class. You do not have to be silent in this video. So, octulus. We can pair it up with the present. We can pair it up with the imperfect. We can pair it up with the future. We can pair it up with the perfect. We can pair it up with the pluperfect. Or we could pair it up with the future perfect. And in every single instance, you can think you see est and say is. You can think you see erat and say was. You can think you see erit and say will be. You can think you see fuit and say was or has been. You can think you see fuerat and say had been. You can think you can see fuerit and say will have been. And then all you must do is about to drive, was about to drive, will be about to drive, has been about to drive, had been about to drive, and will have been about to drive. Are you clear, everybody?
Yeah.
What is the future active periphrastic? Idiot-proof. Is this guy right here idiot-proof?
No.
No. You got to be able to see both. Not idiot-proof, not idiot-proof, idiot-proof. Now, this one is, of course, the future active. Let's talk now about the future passive. Definitely not idiot-proof. The future passive periphrastic shows in the blank obligation. And as a matter of fact, that's what you were going to say. Future passive periphrastic obligation. Future passive periphrastic obligation. Also, we have recently learned that if we want to show agency with a passive verb, they have been driven by their mama. They had been driven by their papa. They will have been driven by, and just pick anything in the ablative case with a ablative of personal agent, and so we got by the mom, by the dad. How about by our sister, sorore? And so it is your ablative of personal agent. But over here, the future passive periphrastic has a dative of agent, in which normally we translate datives to or for, but when a dative is hanging around a future passive periphrastic, it's translated by. because it's the dative of agent. So when I say future passive periphrastic, the first thing you say is obligation. The second thing you say is dative of agent. So let's try. Future passive periphrastic.
Obligation.
Future passive periphrastic.
Dative of agent.
That brings us to our third item to put in for our quiz grade.
Your third item is obligation. O-B-L-I-G-A-T-I-O-N. Obligation.
Obligation indeed. Now, like the future active periphrastic, you can pair the future passive periphrastic with all the tenses. I just at random chose third person singular. It can be all the persons. Sum, as, sum, as, so, rama, rasa, rat, and so forth and so on. Now, it can be paired with an est. It can be paired with an erat. It can be paired with an erit. It can be paired with a fuit. It can be paired with a fuerat. It can be paired with a fuerit. But our translation for each of them must show obligation. Now, on the back of this sheet, on a future date, Monday, we're going to fill it out with what you see here. So do not worry about writing it down now. But so that you can get a sense as to indeed what the translation would be, I will show you. Now, here, if it is within the present tense, and how do I know it's present tense? Est. How do I know it's imperfect tense? Erat. How do I know it's future tense? Erit. You will express it in English as follows. We all know that my subject is he, because it's us and a t. In the present tense, must be verb, in this case driven. If it's imperfect tense, it can either be must have been driven or had to be driven, showing obligation. For the future, will have to be driven. You're not worried about writing this right now. We're going to go over it on Monday. For this, again, it'd be the same as what we had with erat. Must have been driven or had to be driven. This one is going to be had to have been driven, and this one will have to have been driven. And so that's the key. Now, if we wanted to say must be driven, and we want to say by the mom, we're not going to have or ob plus, obviously, an ablative. Instead, because it is a future passive periphrastic obligation. Future passive periphrastic dative of agent. And that is what you're putting in that very last blank. Dative of agent. It would be, must be driven by the mom. Why am I not translating it to or for? Because it's a dative of agent. Had to be driven by the dad. Will have to be driven by the sister. Must have been driven, had to be driven by the boy. Puero. Had to be driven by the girl. Puella. Will have to have been driven by Euclides. Oh, not Euclides. Let's go with Cirrus because he's the driver. Ciro. And so, you see how puero looks exactly like the ablative? How do I know it's not an ablative of a personal agent? There is no ob or ob. How do I know that Ciro is not an ablative of a personal agent? There's no a or ob. And so why do I know it's dative? Why does it have to be dative? Because future passive periphrastic obligation. Future passive periphrastic dative of agent. And that brings us to the last item that we are going to put in to get that easy and free 100.
Your final word is dative. D-A-T-I-V-E.
That is it. So, this is indeed periphrastics. Most people do not consider the perfect passive verb, or the pluperfect passive verb, or the future perfect passive verb as periphrastics because they're so common, but they are. Instead, they think of periphrastics as only being the future active periphrastic, which we love because it is what?
Idiot-proof.
Idiot-proof. And then the future passive periphrastic, also known as the gerundive of obligation, that indeed shows obligation and has a dative of agent. Thanks for watching, Amains and Macalenta, and all of the students in the future. This was brought to you by Latin 2, first period, 2025, 2026. Thanks for watching.